So you know I have a lot to say when originally this was queued up to be on my last quarter notes, but man, I have way too much to say about it. So yeah, let's dive into it. Zeal and Ardor's self-titled album. So, Zeal and Ardor is a Swiss avant-garde metal band from Manuel Gagnon. I think it might be Gagnon. Gagnon? I don't know. And he's a Swiss-American musician who had another project called Bird Mask. Zeal and Ardor was formed back in 2013 with that mix kind of like African-American spiritualism with black metal. And in many cases, it was black metal because, heck, there's not a wider, genre of music than metal. Than maybe progressive rock, because I can't really name off the top of my head a band from the prog or metal sphere with black musicians in it outside of Animals as Leaders. And even then, Animals as Leaders, it's only 1/3 because there's 3 members, only one. Anyway, the first handful of albums from Zeal and Ardor, I didn't necessarily connect with all that much. Like, I really liked what they were doing, and I really loved the presentation. The Devil is Fine was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed Stranger Fruit, the follow-up, and in fact, that was the album that they were touring when I got to see them. And I liked how both of these albums really blended, like, the black experience, the black spiritualism, and the black heritage in this metal, very loud and bombastic stylings. Like, they almost took like the song and chamber music of like a chain gang and put it straight to this like straight up black metal. And I really love that blending. And with that, you also had nods to Satanism. And they always kind of had this really activist, very like political thought moving forward. And this was definitely seen on Wake of a Nation, the 2020 EP that they put out, how like charged it all was, how like oomph it was. And I really, really enjoyed that expression. I really love the drive and the oomph. The only real kind of like drawback for me was that in terms of musically, it was all very like singular. It was all very similar. I didn't feel a whole lot of like range in that. That is until we come to this album. And, the self-titled work, man, it is so much more dynamic. It is so much more like utilizing a bunch of different soundscapes to really paint a full picture. And that is one of the things that I really, really do appreciate with this self-titled work from Zeal and Ardor. I'm loving how full the sound is across all the tracks. I love how dynamic it all is. Like, they're not being afraid of trying different things. And in my opinion, I think each one definitely hits. Like, it starts off with this really intense self-titled, the title track off of this, the Zeal and Ardor, with this blast and blare of sounds. Like, for those prog metalheads, it's very akin to how Haken started off their Vector album. It reminds me very similar of a lot of the soundscapes that were captured with some of the Emotion album with A Perfect Circle. Like, it's very dark, it's very menacing, it's very large, it's very black metal in that sense, which then flows directly into this massively bombastic and energetic track of Run. We have this very infectious and hard-hitting rhythm section that really grounds the track in, and then this like yelling and screaming that's overlaid. And this is where I'm hearing like the one track from Perfect Circle where they redid it with Count Bodies Like Sheep to the rhythm of the war drums. Like, I'm feeling that directly over top of this, and Run really does emphasize a lot of those themes that A Perfect Circle was capturing with that. And the vocal works are so brilliant. Like, on Death to the Holy, I love, again, it's the dynamics of this. It's the range of styles on here. I love how it feels like it's both like a very like black experience in that. Like, I'm hearing like a Southern church in that kind of a sense. And it's really like the juxtaposition of that church heavenly like singing styles with Death to the Holy in that sense. And this is something that Zeal and Ardor has played with in the past, but it's so tangible on this one. And then when you mix that with the very like overproduced singing and screaming that's found on this later on, it just creates such a brilliant juxtaposition and realization of the whole theme of, the wickedness within the divine. And honestly, it wasn't until we got to the fourth track of Immersion where I realized we were listening to something very special. I loved Run, I loved Death to the Holy, like those were very engaging, very like it was showing me a new side of Zeal and Ardor. But once we got to Immersion, this is where like all pre-existing notions of what I thought this album was going to be was just blown out the door, because it starts off in almost this like Coldplay EDM style of music where it's like this really dripping and beautiful synthesizer that's overlaid on top of blast beats drumming and like death metal screaming. And the blending of all these, where you've got these very heavenly, very ethereal like synths over top of these really intense guitars and drumming and screaming. And the whole thing doesn't come out as garbage. Like it comes out as like a fully realized track. It doesn't mix like oil and water. It mixes like really nice food coloring and dye. Really love Immersion. And I really do get immersed in this track. And again, I gotta talk about the singing from Golden Lyre. I love how this track opens up with like some really personal like narration. It almost introduces this character. It's got this very Western guitar, like very deep South Western guitar of this character where you're hearing these like whistling and the narration of, if luck follows the wicked, then I'm a lucky man. And if hope follows the holy, then I'm hopeless, or something along those lines. I probably butchered it a little bit, but it really sets the stage for like this character for Golden Lyre. And the singing, once you get into it, like we've already heard that Manuel is so good at the screaming, at the yelling, at the bombastic, but this is where he really soars in terms of the clean vocals being like almost touching into like the grunge era of not quite screaming, but having that raspiness into the high falsettos. It's just a really interesting and dynamic track in that sense. And man, if you want dynamics in terms of songs, Erase, the sixth track, starts off very somber and like very gentle, but then it just opens up into almost like this industrial metal works. Like we've got this really bombastic and very heavy guitar works that almost touch upon gent at times. So like this guy isn't necessarily afraid to try a whole bunch of different styles. So we have like industrial metal works with this gentcore stuff going on. And again, it mixes flawlessly. It's followed up by Bow, which, again, the singing styles are so aggressive, so tangible, so right in your face. And I'm loving some of the more, like, synthesized and processed sounds that are on here, where other tracks this would have detracted me from the music itself, being like, this is really overproduced. But I think it might be Bow instead of Bow. But it's like Bow Down to the New Empire and that kind of stuff. Basically showing a mirror right up to what's going on. I do really enjoy that it's almost like this propaganda military march in that sense. Then we come to one of my favorite tracks of Feed the Machine. And again, we're right back to that gospel chorus. We're right back to that march. And it's funny because the meter of this track, the rhythm and the cadence, it makes me want to sing apple bottom jeans, boots with the fur. Everyone at the club was looking at her. So that's part of the fun of Feed the Machine. But what I love is once you get into it, you have this really aggressive and very bombastic styling right at the midpoint, and the switching back and forth between this smooth, this very rhythmic, to this like straight up metalcore aspect to it. I really enjoyed the handing back and forth without it just sounding completely out of place. Then we come into I Caught You. Love this track. Very bombastic, very heavy, very quick syncopated guitar works, and again, that's more of like that gent style where it's like dun 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 dun, very rhythmic in that sense. And man, I'm loving the fact that this is really being blended into that. And we come into Church Burn, again, a really great track. I'm loving it. It reminds me of Golden Lyre in that sense, but a little bit more edgy, a little bit more heavy in that case. But yeah, we're just skipping along here into the track lengths. Goddard Damarug, the 11th track. Love how aggressive it is. You know, lots of screaming, lots of yelling. I love just how, again, this is like a mosh pitting track. I love how relentless it is, how in your face it is, and especially having it kind of being sandwiched between Church Burns and Hold Your Head Low, which is probably my second favorite track off of this album. Just a great way to actually structure this whole endeavor. Now we get into Hold Your Head Low. We're getting a lot more of that infuse of like blues and rhythm styles. And what I love is the build of this track. It is so heart-wrenching and so beautiful when we get to that like big crescendo by the end. It builds itself with the guitar structures and the bass line work with this like, if blues went prog, this is kind of what we would eventually have. You know, it's a swelling of emotion, a swelling of just gut-wrenching pain that's being realized there. And unfortunately, the last two tracks of JMB and AHIL are fine. Unfortunately, they're the two weakest points off of the album, and it's a shame that it's the last impressions that we have from this album. Like, I do like how JMB is very aggressive, very hard-hitting, very oomph, but I think AHIL is just a little too Linkin Park for my taste. Like, it's a little too synthesized, a little too processed in that case, which is so interesting because, you know, we've had tracks in the past on this album that have done very similar things, but it just feels a little bit out of place. And I think this is where the limitations of the dynamic range start to make themselves apparent. But really, it's the last like fleeting thought of this album before I want to just circle right back again and listen to this album proper. Yeah, I really, really found myself digging this album. Again, summarize, I love the range. I love the dynamics of this album. I love how it wasn't afraid to try a whole bunch of different things, and ultimately I think most of them succeeded. I love the different ranges in the vocal works in terms of the stylings, and it all felt very similar, you know, like it all felt like a Zeal and Ardor album. I felt like they really took their time to develop a lot of these tracks, and I just found myself loving them. They were very infectious. They were so inviting to listen to, and I couldn't help but blast this every time I was listening to it. Yeah, I love this album. So in the end, I will say self-titled work by Zeal and Ardor, I absolutely love with my whole heart. Yeah, I think that this is their strongest work. I honestly think that they haven't written their best album yet, and I think this is the next stepping stone to even better stuff in the future. I really do feel as if this is a transitional album, or at least I hope it is, because I did feel like all their albums from the past were very singular, very rooted in the same sounds, and that's not a bad thing. You know, so many bands have made their career over one sound, but I like the fact that this one took a chance and tried something different, and ultimately it paid off very, very well in the end. So yeah, that's where I'm at for Zeal and Ardor, their self-titled work. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. That's all I got for you guys today. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.